nailed on the loss of income, business interruption, loss of income, expediting expense. And Cincinnati Insurance just recently lost that lawsuit too. They have to pay, the doctor's offices, the dental groups, restaurants association. So that's a huge chunk of money because when a policy form is ambiguous, the courts will always side with the insured. So the lower court, decided that the language was ambiguous and that the insurance company was interpreting it to their side. So like I said in our earlier conversation, it all comes down to interpretation of contract, and it is very ambiguous about viruses, fungi, things that could shut a business down because business income expediting an expense has to be a result of a direct peril, like fire, lightning hits the building, takes the power out. I'll give you an example. I insured a doctor's office many years ago in the Rhinelacoit, and there was a car accident somewhere in Drayton Eastman Park, knocked over a telephone pole, and the doctor's office power was out all weekend. And because, Beth is on, and because he had serum in the refrigerator, and he lost $30,000 in vaccines because the refrigeration went out. And because it was off premises, it was covered. But if it would have been on premises, it would have been a 72-hour waiting period.
Wow.
But anyways, there's a lot of, like I said, price is just not even a component of insurance. If you're looking for the right coverage, it can be customized.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I started to tell you earlier, I have a son who's in his 20s, and he went through a period of time with speeding tickets and hitting a deer and all kinds of fun stuff. And he moved out and moved in with his girlfriend. And like a year later, I said to my insurance agent, why is my insurance so high? I'm 50 something years old and I have not had a speeding ticket in forever. And she says, your son lives with you. And I'm like, no. He moved out a long time ago. Oh, well, his address still says, your house for the DMV. So we got that fixed in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to be careful too of doubles. I had somebody I had insured with, I think it was Utica National Group, and they did a underwriting check after it was issued, and they called me and said, you got somebody living in this house with 3 DWIs. I go, what are you talking about? And so I called the insured, and come to find out they were living in an illegal double. The person before had converted it to a double, but it wasn't legal. So the guy living downstairs was unit 2, but he had the same address as my client upstairs. So we had to get an affidavit completed and proof that, that was not living in the same household.
Yeah.
So weird things can happen when you're pulling MVRs and clues because there's a lot of illegal doubles out there and triples.
Oh, yeah. There definitely are. Rooming houses.
Yeah,
I
I don't want to dominate the conversation. You get going there.
Well, we've got a few people. We've got 7 on now, so I guess we'll get started, and people will join in as they come along here. But anyhow, so Jim DelVecchio is joining us. He's an insurance broker with
Agent.
Agent
and broker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Agent and broker with is it Prime?
JD Prime Insurance. Yeah.
JD Prime Insurance. Okay. So we asked him to join us because we get questions all the time about insurance, insurance getting canceled because there's a dog on the property. A visitor to a tenant slipped on the steps and wants to sue the landlord. There's always different things going on. And so we thought that if you guys had questions about insurance and how it pertains to your investment property, maybe how it pertains to a flip you're working on, a vacant property, whatever, you can ask the professional here. And Jim comes highly recommended. He is a FRIA member. And for those of you who have not been familiar with FRIA, it's the First Freedom Real Estate Investors Association. It's part of a national group, and I highly recommend you be a part of it if you have anything to do with investment property. And I can definitely tell you how to be a part of it. If you want to reach out to me, I can get that information to you. But when you're part of FRIA, you are able to access all kinds of resources, and Jim is one of the many resources that we are able to access through our local FRIA organization. So Jim, would you like to tell us about your stuff?
Sure, thank you. And I know there's some of you that are on the meeting that I maybe have as clients or know from FRIA. But we had a conversation before we logged on, and Colleen brought up some good questions. And I think one of them was, first burning question was dog breed, therapy dogs. Unfortunately, there's not too much you can do about that. I know it's a big problem in Florida because most condos, townhouses exclude dogs of any kind. But for $300, you could get a therapist to write a letter saying that, that dog is your therapy dog. I think the second thing we talked about is, yeah, there is a naughty dog breed list, but in New York State, those kind of work out. I guess the most dangerous dog bite would be to a child's face. But the burden of proof is a little higher on dog bites than it is on slips and falls. One other thing I said to Colleen earlier before we started, you have to treat an insurance policy as a contract. That's exactly what it is. It's a simple contract, and there's 5 elements. That would be an offer. That would be the application you fill out. The acceptance would be from the underwriter. Because the underwriter is the gatekeeper, they're trying to prevent adverse selection, which is going to be your bad risk. Consideration is the binding mechanism for the policy. That would be your premium. Does it have a legal purpose, and are all the parties competent? That's the next big thing right now is lead exclusion, loss or rents. And usually loss or rents are only covered by a direct peril, excluded by a virus, which the environment we are now. But there has been several favorable court rulings on that for the business income and expediting expense. With the change in Congress, which a little bit more consumer oriented, you may see Congress take some action on that this year, where you probably could file. That's why I did have a couple businesses, and I think, I don't want to say their names because I think one of them's on here. I encouraged them to file claims last year. The claim gets accepted, it's documented, and then you get an official declination. So that's timestamped. So if that ever changes, you're going to get that money for that business income interruption or loss of rents. I never tell an insured never to file a claim. I always encourage them, and if you have a legitimate claim, file it. So it's documented, because you just never know what's going to happen in the future. Then the next big one was, you had mentioned visitor slips and falls. I think I did a workshop for free, gosh, it's got to be 4 years ago this month. But one of the things that I wrote about was requiring tenants to have a tenant policy. An example, one of your tenants has an overnight guest, he or she slips in the shower and breaks their ankle. Your landlord policy is going to be primary. But if they have a tenant policy, that's your circuit breaker. So then your tenant policy is going to be primary. And then the landlord policy would be excess. So I think some of my property managers now are requiring all tenants to have a tenant policy, and some are even paying a premium. Because once you have a slip and fall claim like that, and you get non-renewed, and we have to remarket you with another carrier, we have to reveal all those details. Has there been any claims in the last 5 years? Yeah, we just had to pay $50,000 for a slip and fall claim. Well, not interested. So now you go through all the primary markets, like your Travelers, your Hartford, your Erie, your Leatherstocking, your Chautauqua. And then when they all decline you, you get 3 declinations. Now you can go to the secondary market, which is going to be very expensive, and you may be there for a long time. So just a simple fix of requiring tenants to have a tenant policy, whether you include it in the security deposit or whether you pay it yourself, it's a good investment, because our basic tenant policy through one of our carriers is like $81 a year.
Oh.
That's a cheap investment to protect your primary policy, or what we call your underlying. So those were all good topics that came up. The dog, the insurance policy is a contract, the lead exclusion, which I think is going to happen. because there's really no circuit breaker in the Senate or the legislator, and we have a Democratic governor. If the lead exclusion goes through, we're entering what's called a hard market now, which means that in the real estate world, it's flipping from a seller's market to a buyer's market. So you know what happens when it's a buyer's market. So that's happening in the insurance industry right now. We're just starting to enter a hard market where the underwriting is going to be stricter and the premiums are going to be firmed up, even in the E&O market too. So if they put the lead exclusion in, it's going to make insurance probably harder to get and more expensive. So we're hoping, we did, I think 2019, we did lobby against the legislature when the Republicans still controlled the Senate. We were able to kill that in 2019. But I'm pretty confident that's going to come back this year. Loss of rents, if you've had loss of rents as a result of the pandemic, loss of rents is the same as business interruption. I would have filed claims with your carrier. Just so it's documented and you can see that it was declined, because if the Congress changes the contracts, and they can, because they make the laws, they can force insurance companies to, cough up. And it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, you'll get your monies, you'll get your loss of rents because people are not paying their rents because of the pandemic. But insurance companies, they'll pay the claims, or they'll probably start firming up their prices and make insurance harder to get, which we're entering into now anyways.
With that scenario, do you think that, like right now, when tenants go to eviction, they have to prove that the reason they're not paying their rent is COVID related? Is that something you think the insurance company would be having done as well? Or will they just say, if you didn't pay your rent between March of 2020 and whenever the moratorium is lifted on evictions, and it was because of COVID, they assume it's because of COVID? Is that something?
Well, let me give you another example. In Florida, the biggest problem was Chinese drywall back in remember that? My kids were very heavily involved in that. But so if you had an apartment complex and that was remodeled, I think it's prior to 2010, I forgot the years, and they put Chinese drywall in there, what happens is that drywall starts emitting a sulfuric acid gas-like, and you can't occupy your apartment anymore, so you leave. So the landlord has a 30-unit building that he can't rent because of the Chinese drywall. But the insurance companies smarten up now. They've gotten exclusions in their property form in Florida where they're excluding that now. Because the way they got out of it was they said it was a material defect. They don't cover material defects or architecture that's defective. So what they did was they sued the contractors, and then the contractors sued Home Depot, Lowe's, and then they went even farther and they sued the suppliers of the drywall. So it's kind of like, it's kind of the same scenarios going on here right now. It's a virus. I'm trying to think of the language that they use, but it's kind of ambiguous. So like I said, the dental group, I think it's in Ohio, just won a lower court case. And National Restaurant Association is suing Hartford in California. I see Pat's on here. Hi, Pat. And there's a couple more. So like I said, the first positive thing was the courts in France have overturned it. So it's money in the bank. If you file the claim, it gets denied. It's time stamped. You get a letter from the insurance company, and they point out exactly in the policy where it's excluded. You take that and you file it and save it, because you never know when Congress or the state legislator, they're doing goofy things. They're gonna side with the consumer right now. It's more, New York State's always been a consumer-oriented state, not so much, we all know it's not business friendly. But that's what I get from my insurance trade groups, and I get you all get emails about your trades. So I follow that BI, business income expediting expense. So what is expediting expense? Let's say, you had the virus in your office and you can't operate in that building. Well, the expediting expense will pay for you to go buy or lease another building during the time that your office is being remediated. So not only is it going to cover payroll for 90 days, some cover for a year, but then you're going to get what's called ALS, your actual losses sustained for 13 months. So it's usually, if you look at, if you have a business auto office policy or what's called a BOP, it's usually automatically embedded in the policy form. So keep track of your payroll that you had to cover over the past year. Keep track of any kind of expediting expenses, like you had to send people to work from home, you had to buy them technology, extra pay, whatever, that all has to be saved if the Congress decides to pay those pandemic loss of income claims. So I have your numbers ready. I can't say for sure it's going to happen, but for everything I'm reading, it looks like it's going to go that way.
So if you're basic investor, you've got rental property, would your basic policy cover that loss of rent situation, or is there like an additional element you need to add to your basic policy in order to try and get the loss of rent coverage?
Here's the problem. There's like about 10,000 different property and casualty insurance companies in the United States. And there's 3 different types of forms. There's an ISO form, a URB, and there's some other that create their own forms. So without looking at it, I couldn't say for certainty, but let's say you look at your typical 2-family dwelling, you're going to put what's called a dwelling fire. If I was to purchase a homeowner's policy for you because the owner was the primary tenant, then premises liability is automatically included. I don't have to click a button and say put premises liability on this policy. With a dwelling fire, it's not automatic. And loss of rents is usually 10% of coverage A. So here's a good point to remember. Coverage A is the dwelling. So if you underinsure the dwelling or physical structure, you also underinsure everything else. So coverage A is the dwelling. Coverage B would be private or detached structures like a detached garage, a detached deck, or pool. So if you have 1,000 square foot building, we're using 165 a square this year. So if you don't do at least 80% of that, now you underinsure the garage, you underinsure any contents, you underinsure your loss of rents, and you also underinsure your ordinance or law. And the ordinance or law is if a tree falls on your roof and you have a 2-layer roof, and sometimes you don't need a permit. So let's say for conversation's sake, you got to get a permit to change the roof, and you find out there's 2 layers. So now you got to get somebody to tear the 2 layers off. You got to get a dumpster, you got extra labor. Without ordinance or law, that's not going to be covered under the claim.
Okay.
You're going to be paying for the tear off and the dumpster out in your own dime. And then if you're underinsured, then you're going to be penalized for underinsuring the property. So if you have a $10,000 roof loss and you're not to 80% of replacement costs, you're only 60%, you're only going to get 75% of the claim minus your deductible. That's where price gets you in trouble. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to invest money in property, why would you scrimp on the most important part of that investment? Mm-hmm. But I see it every day of the week. And we don't deal with price sensitive clients because it's more about value. It's more about having the correct form. Because when I used to teach the insurance, first thing I would say, okay, we're underwriting for the time of loss, some point in the future. I have no idea where it's going to be. But once that loss occurs, some point in the future, the contract is frozen. It's like concrete. You can't amend it. You can't change it. It is what it is at the time of loss. That's why it's critical that at the time of underwriting that we know everything about that property. There's some nice endorsements you can put on the dwelling fires now, as well as a landlord's policy for like $15 a year. You can include any utility lines underground, sewer lines. That includes intrusion by roots. It includes corrosion, and it includes earth movement. We used to insure a lot of service stations at one time years ago, and the Let me just turn this off. At the time, they were using fiberglass tanks. They were changing all the USTs because they had to upgrade for EPA. The one station on the corner of Culver Road and I think it's Culver and University, I think it's a Mobile. They had put fiberglass tanks in there in the 80s. Well, the heavy truck traffic, it shakes the ground. The tanks came up through the driveway. So that's considered earth movement, so they denied the claim. So Mobile had to dig those tanks up and put new double wall steel tanks in. Wow. How would you know that unless you knew the form? So you got to know the form. You have to understand the underwriting process. And there cannot be any material misrepresentation of fact. Like the example I gave you, my boys had a claim that was denied in Florida and the agent had filled out the application. Question just simply said, have you filed bankruptcy in the last 5 years? The agent checked, no. Well, it came time to the claim. The first thing insurance companies do is they pull the original application and they scrutinize it. Because there was a time prior to 1992, the claim center was, the mission statement was, we're going to indemnify our insureds and pay them what we rightfully owe them. Well, that changed in 1992. Every insurance company considers the claim center a profit center, which means for every day they hold on to that dollar without paying you is more money in their pocket.
Does anybody have any questions up to this point?
Hey, Jim, you mentioned, sorry, I came in just a little late, but you mentioned about the lead. So are you saying it's your feeling that it's going to pass and that all the insurance companies are going to have to cover lead? Yeah,
there's actually, I had a meeting with an insurance company about 2 years ago, and what they did was they bought a small URB insurance company because they can't raise their rates without filing for a rate increase. So if you can't raise your rates for 2 years and all of a sudden you got to cover lead, you got to start non-renewing policy. So what they did was they bought a company, a cooperative insurance company doesn't have to file for rate changes. So what they're going to do is when this lead exclusion gets removed, they're going to dump all their homeowners into the co-op so they can raise their prices. So they just can't raise rates at will. It's about a 2-year process. So let's say it does go through this session and it becomes effective in January. This one particular insurance company is going to start dumping all their homeowners and their rental properties into the co-op so they can reduce coverages and raise prices. I got that directly from an insurance company president. So if they went to the expense of buying another insurance company so they can do this, you obviously see it on the horizon that, this is going to happen.
All right, because we're getting some lead cases that are coming up, and recently we were served with a letter of intent. Again, fishing, like we talk about, seeing if the insurance covers it, which insurance doesn't cover it at this point. I think, and maybe you can shed some light too, right? If this is going to go through at some point, and the word gets out, we're going to have a lot more lead claims.
Yeah, not on prior tenants, but going forward, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's where I don't even know, I think we chatted on this a bit. I don't even see how does a C of O, you said to me, that doesn't protect you either. I mean, here's the deal. I got this from a trial attorney, does mostly with insurance companies. He says, the greatest duty for any insurance policy is not to indemnify you, is to defend you. So if you can think about that for a second, if I have a fire and they have to indemnify me, the duty to defend me is greater than that. So that's your biggest benefit of any insurance policy, is the duty to defend or insured.
There is a question in chat from Greg Brooks, and Greg, I may need some clarification on this. Greg asks, if a tree falls on a roof that already has 3 layers on it, is there less of a claim that's paid? And Greg, do you mean if you have full coverage, does it pay out less?
Well, it's going to depend.
Yes.
If he's got a 3-layer roof, I have no idea where the municipality is. You're not going to want to put a 4th layer on it. And the insurance company The municipality may say, you know, we don't allow 3 layers, 2 at the most. You're going to have to tear it off down to the lumber. And unless you have ordinance or law, you're not going to get 10% of coverage A. So let's say you underinsure the property at 100,000 instead of 200,000. You're going to get 10% of 100,000. So you're going to get 10 grand minus the deductible for the tear off. That's a lot of material, 3 layers. So I don't know how many dumpsters you're going to need. Pat, how much does a dumpster cost? I don't even know. You do a lot of, huh?
Yeah, for roof jobs, anywhere from 500 to 700
All
about.
right, so there you go. So you may need 3 dumpsters for 3 layers. The extra labor, yeah, that's the way it works. That's why coverage A is so important. It populates every other coverage.
I got a roof now that's got 6 layers. And we're stuck. Yeah.
Mine had 5.
Wow, how did the
Yeah.
roof even stay on? 5 layers.
The roofer said, and it was over tongue and groove. So he
Oh,
really was unhappy removing all of that. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
said my house said a big wow as soon as he took the layers off. We had no idea.
Oh.
But anyhow, in regards to the tenant policy you mentioned, the $81 a year for, as an average, I guess, for landlord to pay that for the tenant, that seems like a no-brainer. So you can, you know, avoid the risk of having somebody fall and sue you that visited a tenant. Is that policy also cover, you know, if there's a fire and the tenant loses all their possessions, or if somebody breaks in and steals their stuff, will that all be covered as well?
Yeah, let me address that. You got to make sure that it's in the tenant's name first so that they're first name insured.
Okay.
So if you pay the premium, you don't have to worry about being an AI and additional interest. So like if they don't make the payments, you get notified that the policy is going to lapse for non-payment.
Okay.
But it's going to cover, it's broad form. So it's going to be named peril. So it would be fire, lightning, wind, hail, sudden bursting of pipes. Even if that pets do damage, you know, if they damage your property, it has to be a physical damage, not just crapping on the rug. But yeah, the premises liability is going to cover slips and falls. It's going to cover their contents. It's going to cover their loss of rent. So let's say, you know, we had like 3 in 1 year kitchen fires. I think one of the tenants, I don't even know who told me this story. It's somebody, a FRIA member. The tenant was cooking. The kids were watching TV and she ran to the store to get more ingredients. When she came back, the kitchen was engulfed in flames. She didn't have tenant liability. So the landlord's policy had to pay the loss. So now you got that on your history, you know, that you've had a fire and you're going to own that for at least 5 years. So for $81 a year, why not use insurance, what it's meant for, to transfer the risk? Transfer the risk that you have by having tenants to the insurance company for $81 or $90.
Pat, you might know the answer to this. I'm sure you do. Can you put that as a requirement in your lease that tenant, I mean, the landlord will pay for it, but the tenant must have a policy in their name? Is that allowed to do?
Yeah, you can definitely put in the lease that they have to have renter's insurance. My only problem with that is if they know about it, how many times they're going to use it.
Yeah.
You know, we have a few tenants now that anytime there's water in the basement, they're calling and have 3 computers and TVs, and you know, it's just the insurance companies know it. So I would gladly pay that $81 and so forth, and see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And if the tenant is putting in perpetual claims because it is a tenant policy, that still won't impact the landlord, will it, Jim?
No, it'll impact the tenant. They'll get canceled.
Okay.
But there's, I'll give a quick little story. My son, when he graduated from college, moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I remember going in just to be with him, and the gal in the room said there was actually an Allstate agent sitting in the same room. She says, "Well, go get your tenant insurance, come back over here and sign the lease." So he couldn't even sign the lease until he purchased a tenant policy. And that was, you know, an apartment complex, a really nice apartment complex. Big, you know, and that was, gosh, see, he's been out of college now 15 years. So that was 15 years ago.
Kind of like when you ask a tenant to bring a credit report before you accept them as a tenant. do you think it's possible, Pat, that tenants would bring a runners in policy as a final requirement to sign a lease? You think that's happened, or have you had that happen? Have tenants provided it?
Renters insurance?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, some
Okay.
tenants have provided, especially if we have some properties where they want dogs and the owner's okay with it. And it's usually a special case scenario, maybe a real difficult place to rent. You kind of don't blame people for having an animal. We don't like it for obvious reasons, insurance reasons, but we'll have the dog listed on the renters insurance, and then the owner will approve it.
Good, okay.
And then, of course, we want to be on the policy as well. I forget the correct name of it, but as long as
AI, on the runners, you can only be an AI, additional interest.
okay.
But on the landlord, you can be, your landlord can name you as an additional insured GPM, but not on a tenant policy.
So if you're an
Insurance companies-
official, if you're
Go
an
ahead.
additional interest, does that mean that if somebody goes back to you for some kind of compensation on something, because you're an additional interest, will that renter's insurance policy help you pay?
No, the renter's insurance will only indemnify the insured. The AI is just giving an example. If you're over 65 and you get a homeowner's policy, there's a little form in there, even RG&E sends them out. You have a third-party person in case the elder person misses a payment or doesn't
Okay.
respond to any kind of communication from the insurance company. Can we contact a daughter or a son or something? So the AI just gives you that protection that if they're making payments and they don't make them, then you'll get a letter saying that the tenant policy is going to cancel for non-payment. That's a good reason to pay in full up front. I did write an article on 10 reasons why landlords should require tenant insurance, and I can send it to you later.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll be
Well,
happy
you
to
can-
share it with the people on the call.
But the biggest problem though, and I just got back from Florida and I've noticed a change. I just had a conference call with one of my carriers, insurance companies, Salino and Barnes and all those trial injuries attorneys, if you notice their ads, and I noticed it in Florida too, that they're shifting from car accidents to slips and falls. Because PIP, personal injury protection claims, go on a long time in the courts. But slips and falls, most insurance companies want to settle before they even go. I mean, PIP claims have a different process than a slip and fall. So I just got back from Florida along 95 and 595 and 75. All the billboards were slip and fall. So they've made this switch to car accidents to slip and fall. So that tells me, and even up here I've noticed that must litigate a lot easier. Insurance companies are just willing to pay to get rid of them, because litigation is going to cost them more than throwing 15, 20 grand in it. But yeah, now you own that slip and fall. Now it's going to be on your record. Some carriers keep them for 5 years. There's something called a clue. And what happens is even if you have a water claim, and they're doing this more in the Southeast, and I tell people, if you're going to buy a house like in Florida, you might want to pull a clue because you want to see if there's been any water claims on the property, because where there's water, there's what? There's mold.
Water damage.
Well, mold's the biggest
Mold.
problem.
Yeah.
So if there's been a water claim, a lot of the insurance companies will deny coverage. And now you've already put a purchase offer on the house. Now what do you do?
Well, that's a good segue into a question in chat. Does a structure fire that ends up on the landlord's policy as a claim, does that claim stay with the landlord or as an individual, just with the house as you would find on the clue report?
Stays with the house and the LLC or the individual. They're gonna, a couple times, well, this happens all the time. I just had somebody come in for commercial auto, and one of the employees told the HR person that, she's got a clean license. This young lady had 3 accidents within 3 months, all at fault. So same thing with a property. You might want to pay a few bucks and pull a clue on a property. Has there been any fires? Was a fire properly remediated? Was there any mold claims? Where there's water, there's always mold. So in the Southeast, if you buy a house anywhere below the Dixie line, insurance companies are pulling clues and see if there's been any water claims. And
Can-
actually, go ahead.
Can anyone pull a clue? Or does it have to be the owner or the insurance company?
You know what? I think you can subscribe to Clue. I don't because I get them through the carrier. But that's a good question. I don't subscribe to MVRs, motor vehicle records, because the carriers we use provide that. Yeah, if I was going to buy any property in Florida, the first thing I'd be concerned about would be Chinese drywall.
Mhm.
And also, if there's been any kind of claims. One quick thing, I just read a book called Deny, Delay, Defend, Why Insurance Companies Don't Pay Claims. And it really started about when they transitioned from paying claims to being a profit center. And one of the claims was on a home where the homeowner had all the hardwood floors covered with rugs. So there was a water damage that obviously the wood heaved under the rugs. The insurance company denied paying for the hardwood floors. They said it's called abandoned property. And I said, what the heck does that mean? And I read further. Well, the insurance companies considered that since you put carpeting over the hardwood floors, you have abandoned the hardwood floors.
Mhm.
So all they wanted to pay for was particle board underlayment. They didn't want to pay for the hardwood floors. So I had to go to litigation. So some insurance companies are really good at paying claims. The only reason I don't want to sound negative or parental, but I'd encourage every one of you to watch the podcast my kids just did down in Florida with Monarch adjusting. And one of the largest claims they're actually litigating right now, I think it's in Tampa, is a $10 million roof claim for a condo. And insurance company is denying it. So they had to go up there and, hire a couple of engineers and determine where the water got in, where is the point of entry? And that's, the biggest problem. One of the first things they do down there now, instead of saying with a claim adjusters, they send an engineer. Why would you send an engineer first? Wouldn't you send a claim adjuster first? The engineer's purpose is how are we going to get out of this? And another problem with Florida, all your utilities, your sewers, your water lines are encased in the concrete slab. So that leak could go on for years before you discover it. So now you discover it, it's been leaking for 5 years. Insurance company denies it based on that's neglect.
Jeez.
Yeah.
We have another question in chat. Is it possible to get H3 coverage on a single family rental or on a 6-family house rental with no liability coverage?
H3, meaning an HO3, a special form? Only way you can get an HO3 is if the landlord is also occupies one of the 6 or one of the 2. Otherwise, it's going to be in a dwelling fire. Why would you not want to have liability in New York State? There's apps. New York State applies both doctrines on property owners. That's absolute and strict. There's no defense. Get your checkbook out. And you still got to defend yourself, and that can go on for years. If it's, God forbid, you have a fire and there's a fatality. I actually had a State Farm adjuster in my class about 10 years ago. And these 11-year-old kids were jumping fences in Albany. Make a long story short, the last house pool that they went in, one of the 11-year-olds drowned in the pool. State Farm just paid the $1 million umbrella out and paid out the $1 million underlying without even litigating. No defense. Why would you want to litigate something you can't defend?
Jim, can I ask a quick question? I apologize. I'm not doing it through chat because I'm actually driving. Is that okay for me to ask a question?
Got both hands on the wheel?
I'm driving with my niece. I'm good.
Okay. I don't want any liability, Joe.
Quick question here. You mentioned Salino and Barnes. So I had a guy who was jogging on the street at the edge of one of my properties. There was a very small pothole. It was maybe an inch. I already went and looked at it. I think it's ridiculously frivolous. The guy was jogging. He's 40-something years old. and supposedly tripped. And of course, I get a letter from Salino and Barnes. The insurance company's handling it. But, you know, this guy, I guess, tripped, hurt his shoulder, bruised his hip, blah, blah, blah. And obviously, he wants, I think he may have thinks he hit the lottery. But how long, I mean, obviously the insurance company is fighting it because, their attorneys are handling it. It's been about a couple of months. What's an average time to hear, to basically for something like this to get situated, settled? Because I know I think it's going on like 3-4 months now. What are you seeing average time for them to either settle or be able to say this is ridiculous? Because, to say you tripped over a little pothole, I went to look at it, was just, I don't know. I think the guy may have been drunk when he was jogging. I don't have a freaking clue. But,
yeah. We have one slip and fall claim in office here it'll be 4 years in March. That's why I said the greatest duty, the biggest benefit is the duty to defend. So if you have $100,000 coverage on a property and burns to the ground, you don't have insurance, 4 years of litigation is going to cost you more than $100,000. Most of these litigation attorneys are about $400 to $600 an hour. And we all know attorneys love to write hours. If you've ever seen a bill, 10 minutes on this phone call, $120. Write a letter, $200. That's going to go on for 4 years. I mean, this one still hasn't been settled.
Are you trying to depress me?
Yes. You want some some antidepressants? No, the problem is in New York is look up tort liability. It's a civil claim. But look up tort liability in New York. It's
all right, Tim. I only want you to tell me good news. So
I can't help you with good news.
Just drive straight to a bar, Joe.
I mean, these slips and fall claims are going to be coming in. So, patch your sidewalks, patch your driveways, take a picture of them, document them.
Listen, this was more on the road than it was on my driveway, but they're still trying to come at.
Doesn't the city own maintenance of the sidewalks? Depends on the municipality.
Well, he was actually in the street. So that's the thing.
How's that come on to you?
Salino and Barnes.
He landed on your property.
Yeah, he landed on something. I was like, all right.
What does the insurance company attorney tell you?
I've been trying to get a hold of them, see what's going on. They're like, oh, we're working on it. So I haven't really heard a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah.
With that. So.
Well, the biggest thing that comes back now after property inspections, and once you buy a policy, the carrier has 60 days to inspect or issue on a waiver. You got to know what they're doing. Are they doing an inspection or are they doing on a waiver? And a waiver means is that we're going to issue the policy without inspecting the property. So now that's on the insurance company.
Well, I think they inspected mine. So
most of them will in rental, but some of them were getting a little brave prior to 2020. I think even NYCM, the last meeting I had with them, they were going to go to waiver. I don't know if they transitioned to that, but I don't think they'll ever do that on a rental property. But the biggest denials we're getting now are steps, uneven driveways, and sidewalks. That's where all the claims are right now, slips and falls. So with that information, now you can prepare yourself, put on your armor, go fix your sidewalks, go fix your steps, go fix your driveways, take pictures of them, date them, and timestamp them. So now you have that information in a file. And the guy, how do you know he didn't take a picture of somebody else's driveway that's cracked or somebody else's sidewalk? And I don't want to dominate, but one more just came up. I had a student about 12 years ago. He worked for RG&E. I'm sorry, it was an RG&E claim. And the house was, I think, in Greece, and the meter reader claimed he fell in his driveway and broke his leg. So Hartford just had to pay out the full limit of the policy, which was $100,000, and they canceled them right after they paid out the limit. But there was no way to prove that the RG&E meter reader fell in his driveway. There was no witnesses, there was no pictures, or at the time there was no video cameras. What do they call that thing on the door? But what happened was that the RG&E's work comp carrier subrogated against him because they wanted to recover the monies they paid on the work comp claim. That's another thing you got to be careful is subrogation, and does your policy have waiver of subrogation? There's just so much that goes on into a policy, and we're at 10 carriers right now, and I don't really want to go any more than that because I have to become familiar with all the policy form. And there's no two same. It's, some insurance policies are like a fingerprint. There's no two fingerprints the same. So if you think you're buying a homeowner's and it's the same as the one you had the year prior, be looking for trouble at the time of a claim. Because really the onus is on the insured to read the policy, all 108 pages of boring language that not even a scribe can interpret. But, and I don't say this that I know it all, but you know what? If you find a good agent, stick with them. If you find a bad agent, stay away from them. And that's like anything else, whether it's a good doctor. I always get worried when I walk into an attorney's office and the sign says lawyers practice. Geez, I don't know if I want him practicing on my situation. It's no different than a doctor's practice. Is he going to practice on me doing this hernia operation? So there's limits. There's limits to everybody's knowledge and skill set. I have limits. Well,
Greg asks, is it possible that he can see his own CLU report, what's written about him?
Whoever is insured, he could ask his agent. I couldn't, as not being an agent of record, but he could ask his current agent, say, if a CLU report is pulled on my property, could I see it? There's a lot of databases now that realtors and brokers can subscribe to pull those clues. Like I say, I don't subscribe to them because I get them from the carriers when if they find something. I'll get a printout and they'll say 5 years ago there was a water claim, and $30,000 was paid out. Even for contractors, we had an attorney file a water claim. She called me and she goes, I had a toilet put in by this contractor last year and it leaked and it got under the floor. And she said, my floor is damaged. She goes, can I put a claim on my homeowners? And I said, no, go after the contractor. Because there's 4 coverages in a contractor's policy would be an occurrence coverage, personal and advertising injury, and products and completed operations. So she could go after the contractor and submit a claim against his, what we call PCO, products completed operations. So I'll give you an example. ABC contractor puts a deck on the back of my house. It would be second story. I'm all excited when we have a cookout and we have 30 people over. Well, we have 30 people on the deck collapses, 4 or 5 people are seriously injured. Well, my homeowners probably would cover that, but they would subrogate against the contractor under PCO because that's their product. So if you have a contractor doing any work, any of your properties, make sure they have number 1, workers' comp, and number 2, either a business owner's policy or commercial general liability policy. Because if you hire subs without workers' comp, they get injured, it's going to be on you. And people will say to me, oh, he's a good friend, he won't sue me. Well, the wife that he has with 3 kids at home no longer has an income. She's going to come after you. She's got to feed those babies. And I don't care about your friendship. I'm going to sue him.
Anybody else with questions? Oh, wait, we've got another message. Brian, can you read that?
I can. And it is, if I wanted to alert my neighbor's insurance company of a risk, how can I find out who's insuring my neighbor's property?
I don't understand the question. If my neighbor has a risk or I have a risk?
So if I'm a homeowner, but I see that my neighbor's property has a risk, there's a lot of
tree limbs or something?
Landlords that are out of state. So how do
Maybe
I?
a tree that's
Yeah,
a tree that's ready to fall on your house or something.
Or their own house.
Yeah, you're not gonna be able to find out because it's kind of like HIPAA. That contract's between the homeowner and the insurance company. That's confidential information. Unfortunately, there's really no way of finding out. You probably could pull a clue on the property and see if there's been any claims on it previously. Again, I would flip that back to the realtors. I think the realtors do have I know in Florida they do. I don't know, Colleen, maybe you can check into that. Because the subscription's pretty expensive and I'm not going to subscribe to it when I get it for free from 10 different carriers.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can definitely look into that. Yeah, I was not aware that it was actually something us as lay people could do. I thought it was just something an insurance company could do. So
Well,
we'll
wouldn't you
definitely
think
look
that'd
into
be an added value for you, Colleen? Because you could say to
Totally.
your buyer, say, look, I'm going to pull a clue. See if there's been any
Absolutely.
water claims, particularly, or if there was a water claim, was it fixed properly? Or did the homeowner fix it just to sell the house and cover it up?
We've had incidents where we've sold houses and we'll get a call from the buyer's agent saying, hey, the buyer went to get insurance and they noticed that there was a fire claim 5 years ago. Can you give us more details on it? And we've had to do things like that, but we've never had I haven't in 30 something years ever pulled a clue report on my own. It's always been an insurance company that brought it to us. So that's something we'll have to look into.
Yeah, it's about bringing value to your clients. Also, too, I went to a Greater Rochester, what's the name of that group? A couple years ago.
GRAR.
Yeah, I went to their meeting 2 years ago to Locust Hill Country Club. The attorney that was presenting got burned on I think a secondary home he bought. Quick scenario, he buys his home, his attorney does a title search, and then after he moves in and occupies the cottage, he notices people are walking across his lawn and going into the water in his yard. And he finally stopped and he goes, what are you doing? And he says, well, when we bought that house across the road, we have it right away. He goes, no, you don't, it's my property. And did another search, and sure enough, his attorney missed it. And he filed a claim on the title insurance. Because now I have waterfront property that everybody across the street can use. So my advice is if you buy property, usually the banks make you buy the title insurance to indemnify them. I would pay the extra $1,000 and put my name on the title insurance in case somebody comes back 5 years later, say, hey, I own this house, or this was, will to me and my siblings, get off our property.
Have you seen any cases where, we're going through a lot of issues right now with eviction moratorium. And so sometimes the people who signed the lease a year ago are no longer living there and somebody else is. I've got a case right now where the woman is on the lease. She invited her boyfriend to live there. They didn't get along. She moved out. Now he's there. He's not even on the lease, but they can't get rid of the gentleman. Probably doesn't have renter's insurance. What would happen if, he did something in the house and there's a claim? I mean, who does that fall on?
Landlord. I know my son had that problem. He had a condo in Florida, and the guy upstairs was in foreclosure. He was there for 5 years. And the water in the toilet overflowed. This guy was a real winner. And it went into my son's condo. His insurance company had to pay because the guy upstairs had no condo insurance. I've been there. I can't believe he stayed there 5 years before they finally got him out. But he thought he was a rock star. He played his guitar loud every night and sang, and HOA couldn't do anything about it to get him out. That's an issue. That's really a contract. A lease is a contract. Whoever draws up your leases, again, we have the politics of infiltrated contracts. It's one of our biggest benefits. I don't know how long we're going to have it, but our remedies are in the courts and the right to own private property. My feeling, the courts are compromised right now, particularly in New York State. And yeah, you may have a good case, but it's all subject to interpretation and who has the most money to keep litigating it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Your attorney, your lease is a contract. If it's in there, I don't know if the governor's order, negates the contract. That's a good question for a constitutional attorney. These governors are just issuing all these edicts, and if nobody challenges them, they stand.
We had a question, if you pull a clue report, does it show you what insurance company paid the
Yeah,
claim?
it does.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Another quick question, we're just short, we got 5 more minutes to go here. Just a couple questions I have. Number one, you have a rental property, tenant moves out and it's vacant for a little while. Should you notify your agent that the property is vacant?
Not until 60 days.
60 days, okay.
After that,
So
you have
if
to
something
notify them.
happens in the first 60 days and it's broken into or something's stolen, furnace is ripped out or whatever, that still will be covered as long as it's under 60 days vacant.
Yeah, because they allow you 60 days. After 60 days, you have to notify them.
Okay,
But read your policy form. Some might be 30, you know, some might not accept it at all. Some might reduce the coverage form and give you an example. In a traditional environment, if it goes 61 days, they remove the peril of VM&M, vandalism, malicious mischief, and they reduce all the other perils by 15%. But every time somebody moves on, if you notify your insurance company, just understand what your rights are. Do I have to notify them within 30 days or do I have to notify them at 12:01 a.m. on the 61st day? They understand that there's a transitional period going on in there because you might want to paint them, rip out the rugs, put in new cabinets and fixtures. But check your policy form and the carriers, none of the carriers are the same.
does every insurance company have a different list of prohibited dog breeds, or is there one master list of prohibited dog breeds that a landlord could refer to?
It's usually, there's 10. We do have a carrier that will take the dogs, but they'll make you sign an affidavit that the coverage is excluded.
Okay.
The only one I know that'll take any breed, I don't even know if it's still applicable today, but State Farm was taking pit bulls.
They are not taking pit bulls?
They were.
They were,
They didn't-
okay,
They call it a naughty dog list. Some carriers stick right by it.
okay,
But usually you think about it, you know, your German Shepherd, your Chow, your pit bull mixes, usually any breeds. I can tell you that I got my worst dog bite by a Chihuahua and ended up in the emergency room walking out of somebody's house, and he latched onto the back of my calf and wouldn't let go. So, yeah, so that was my worst dog bite. So,
yeah.
he was 10 pounds maybe, but man, he bit hard.
And then in the beginning of the show today, you had mentioned you tell your clients if you think you have a claim, file it.
Yep.
You know, and when you file claims, do you risk your insurance going up because you have filed a number of claims? Is that something they take into? You do?
No, because, well, no, here's
Oh,
the
okay.
deal. If you have a claim, you have an obligation under the contract to notify the insurer at the earliest possible time or within 30 days. So let's say you think you're gonna have a claim and a year goes by and now you file a claim and they say, well, when did this happen? Oh, 13 months ago. Well, you're under an obligation by contract to notify us as soon as possible. If there's a
Okay.
crime involved, you're supposed to call the police, and we're supposed to be notified in writing within 30 days. You just
Okay.
violated a contract. Goodbye.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's why I say it's a must. If you, we just have a client that we thought there might be going to be a claim. So I asked my underwriter and she said most definitely. So now it's documented, it's time stamped. Nothing ever happens, nothing ever happens.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions from anybody?
I saw something pop in chat. I don't know if it was covered.
16 and ICMIN, I don't know if there's a.
Does CLU report on a property disclose the name? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the name of the insurance company that's currently providing insurance.
No, because the clue is a look back.
Okay.
Okay.
It's like I said, it's a contract between the current homeowner or landlord and the insurance company. It's just like you can't know what's on my medical records or who my health insurer is, the same as I can't look that up for you. If any agent did that, then they would be violating a confidentiality privacy agreement with their client.
Okay. Now we have another question. Who does one insure a vacant property through? Do you have a particular company that you would suggest for just vacant properties, maybe properties you're working on to flip?
Yeah, we have called Vacant Express. That's underwritten by Diamond Insurance. And you can take a 3-month, a 6-month, a 9-month, or a 12-month term. I always issue them on a 3-month because it just automatically renews every 3 months, and the insured gets a bill they can pay online. You can, it does cover a limited amount of theft of materials, 5,000. No other insurer will cover any kind of theft. And most of them won't stay on that long. So if it's vacant and it's renovated, your best place is, that's why we have Vacant Express. You do have
Vacant
to,
Press.
vacantexpress.com. We represent them here locally. We use them a lot because a lot of flipping going on. And
So just to track back to something you just said, I just want to make sure I understand it. A property is vacant, tenant moved out last week. Neighbors go in and take out the furnace and the plumbing, covered with insurance, or you
plumbing
said
is,
something about,
plumbing is now excluded, but anything that's permanently attached to the structure or it's bolted to the concrete floor, considered under coverage A.
okay,
So let me give you an example. If you buy a generator for your home and it costs you $10,000 installed, and they pour a concrete slab and bolt it to the slab, it's now part of the dwelling. So if you add any kind of equipment, that's another thing where coverage A is so important that, and then some policies don't cover, like somebody comes in and rips the riser out because it's all copper. There's some policies don't cover theft of the riser or
And you said
theft of it.
plumbing's excluded,
Yes.
did you say?
Because of the copper.
But if it's PEX and somebody just goes in and rips out all your PEX to be fun and interesting, is that covered? Because it's not
Depends on
copper?
the policy, depends how it was underwritten and coverages you chose.
Okay.
But those are all if you did, ask, it's a good thing to ask your agent or broker a lot of questions. And if he or she can't really answer them, give them an opportunity to research it. If you're going, let's say for an example, you're going to a captive agent, State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide, Geico. You only have one form to worry about. Say you really can't answer your questions or they don't know your form.
Right.
They don't know their form. Then are they really looking out for your best interest? We have 10 carriers. We have to know, I can, call an underwriter or email an underwriter right away and say, the riser gets ripped off of this house. How do I cover that? Because it was, happened in the past. And they'll say, well, make sure, that you had theft of building materials. And there was a FRIA member, I think about 3 years ago, a house was struck by lightning, took out the riser and the service panel, and the service panel was still fuses. And the ordinance for, I think it was Williamson, required any house be upgraded to circuit breakers. Because the underinsured on coverage A, there was not enough coverage to upgrade the riser and the service panel because of the ordinance or law. It'll pay for like, kind, and quality, which was a fused panel.
Mhm.
It's not going to pay for a circuit breaker because now the ordinance requires it.
Okay.
All good questions, but without looking at the policy form, the carrier, there's just so many variables. Just ask a lot of questions. I mean, I'm sure you tell your buyers that, or your sellers, ask a lot of questions.
Mhm.
We had, sorry, Jim, not to cut you up, but we had some
No.
copper thefts, and the insurance company covered the copper, but not the damage to get to the copper. So if they're ripping it out of shower walls and so forth, and downstairs you had some issues with them ripping it out of the ceiling, and then you had a deductible to deal with as well.
Right.
Mhm.
So just keep it in
Well,
mind.
well, the thing of it is, a lot of the property managers are taking large deductibles, to reduce the premium.
Mhm.
But actually that's a good thing because it's something called, well, not exactly, but it's called self-insured retention. And it tells the insurance company that you're willing to take more of the risk on as a traditional homeowner, landlord. But then again, you know, the first $5,000 you have to adjust yourself. They'll come in after 5,001. But a lot of property managers, landlords, most of them do their own work anyway. So if you're buying materials at cost and your labor, yeah, maybe you can absorb a $5,000 deductible. Like I have one guy that has a $25,000 deductible on a commercial building, but the building's worth $1.2 million. So 25,000 to him is coffee money. But it does definitely reduces the fire rates, and so do sprinklers, takes fire rates down by about 20%.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? We're a little bit over our time frame here, so. Nope. All right, so Jim, thank you so much for
Sure.
joining us today. All the information, really fascinating. I took a ton of notes.
Okay.
And I'm going to send out your contact information to everybody who
Sure.
was on the call today and to those that may choose to watch the recording later. Sometimes this hour doesn't really fit into people's schedules, so I send it out to everybody, and so you may be getting some hits from some other people as well. But we really appreciate your time and
Sure.
your experience and your advice.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to help, and hope I didn't sound parental or too negative, but I think it's just the teacher part of me that got to have good information.
It's appreciated. We all need
Okay.
to learn more, obviously, about this especially. So, and right now in these times as well. So
Really.
very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks,
Everyone
Jim.
have a
Bye.
good weekend.
You too. Bye, Pat. Bye, Beth.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.